Good evening, everyone. My name is Archita, and I lead the Member Association program at FIAPO, a collective voice of the animal rights movement in the country. I welcome you all today to this webinar on understanding FCRA for animal welfare organizations, where we will delve into the nuances of the law, penalties, compliances, and a lot more. I will be your moderator for today's session, and thank you so much for joining us today. For this webinar, we are extremely delighted to have Mr. Noshir Dadrawala here with us today. He is the CEO of the Center for Advancement of Philanthropy, through which he has been offering compliance-related advisory to nonprofits and corporate social initiatives. His career spans over a vast period of 35 years, and with hands-on experience and practical insight, Noshir's main role at CAP involves simplifying the very confusing and complex maze of the old and the new laws, which are often ever-changing. His current international affiliation includes serving as member on the advisory board of the International Center for Not-for-Profit Law. He has also authored several resource books and is currently an active blogger on compliance-related issues for NPOs. He's a speaker at many local and international conferences and guest faculty at leading business schools. Thank you so much, Mr. Noshir, for sharing your valuable time with us, and it's a great pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Archita. So
I'm
going to try and share my PowerPoint.
Before we move on, I'll just take a minute to make a quick announcement. I would request all our participants to please feel free to write all your questions in the Q&A box below. And you can also share your questions at the chat option, which will be there during the Q&A session. Now, without taking more of everyone's time, I would like to hand over the session to you, Mr. Noshir. Please go ahead.
Welcome to this webinar on FCRA. And I will try to walk you through some of the requirements in terms of compliance under FCRA, as also with the changes that have happened. I'm not sure at this point of time among the 20 or 22 odd participants who are part of this webinar today, how many of you have FCRA or how many of you don't have. But regardless, I'm going to walk you through this presentation. So may I have the next slide, please? Okay, so this is the history of FCRA, that it was originally an act of 1976. It was part of the period of the emergency that was imposed by the Prime Minister of India, late Mrs. Indira Gandhi. She had instituted a one-man commission called the Kudal Commission. Justice Kudal was one of the judges, and the report said that there was foreign funding coming basically to destabilize the country, and there were NGOs that were also receiving foreign contributions for various activities which were of a political nature. So essentially the law has its roots in way back in 1976. After that, the law of 1976 was completely repealed, and we had the FCRA 2010, wherein the concept of person and of renewal of FCRA came in for the first time. Let me try and explain what that means. First of all, the earlier Act of 1976 only spoke about associations to be registered under FCRA, but 2010 Act, which is in force right now, brought in the concept of person, which also includes an individual, which means even an individual receiving foreign contributions for any kind of specific economic, social, religious program would require an FCRA. Personal remittances are not considered as FCRA. And the concept of renewing your FCRA every 5 years was brought in under the FCRA 2010. This was followed by the rules. Then in 2015, there were again amendments to the rules, and all processes were mandatorily made online, where the Ministry of Home Affairs completely stopped accepting anything which was hard copy, and all processes were made online. And then we saw some of the most major amendments in the COVID year, as we like to call it, year 2020, which is in September 2020, there was the FCRA Act itself was amended and the rules itself. And thereafter also there have been various circulars and notifications, which I will try to walk you with. So this is the quick history of the FCRA and the timelines. May I have the next slide, please? Next slide, please. Yeah. So these are the fundamentals that I will walk you through. First of all, the fundamental is that the term foreign contribution means donation, delivery, or transfer made by any foreign source of article, currency, whether Indian or a foreign security. Now, you need to understand what this means. Most times we think that only if we receive a contribution in US dollars or in euros or in sterling, it's a foreign contribution. That's a complete myth. Under FCRA, what is important is the term foreign source, which you see over there. If the source is foreign, FCRA applies. And the foreign source can give you a donation or deliver something or transfer it to your organization in the form of an article. An article could be a computer, it could be a vehicle, it could be equipment. That's in other words, it refers to in-kind contributions. Currency, whether Indian or foreign. So, I mean, the test of FCRA is not foreign currency or forex, as we like to call it. It could be Indian or foreign. And foreign security means that if it's a foreign source has given you stocks or shares or something of that sort in the nature of a contribution, that would be deemed as foreign contribution as well. Next slide, please. So this is the concept of person who is eligible to receive foreign contribution. The law says any person can receive foreign contribution subject to the following condition. The person must have a definite cultural, economic, educational, religious, or a social program. Please understand, person means individual or institution. And of course, the person must obtain FCRA registration or prior permission. These are two separate things. FCRA registration is a registration that is given to you to receive multiple contributions from multiple sources for a period of 5 years, whereas prior permission is given only for a specific sum of money from a specific source. Generally, one goes for prior permission if the organization is less than 3 years old, and you must not be under any of the prohibited categories that is provided under FCRA. So this is about who's eligible to receive FCRA. Next slide, please. Okay, who cannot receive foreign contribution under FCRA? The law says any candidate for election, correspondent, columnist, cartoonist, editor, owner, printer, or publisher of a registered newspaper, public servant, judge, government servant, or employee, members of any legislature, political party or office bearer thereof, organizations of a political nature. So you can see the essence of the 1976 law still prevails even in the year 2022. This is the list of people who cannot receive foreign contribution. This doesn't mean that any of these people cannot receive personal remittances. If, let us say, your children are sending foreign remittances to you or your relatives are sending to you, that is not a foreign contribution. Remember, foreign contribution is a contribution received by an individual or an institution for any specific cultural, educational, economic, religious, or social program. So personal remittances are not part of FCRA. Next slide, please. So definition of person under FCRA. Person includes an individual, as you can see. It includes a Hindu undivided family association and a company registered under Section 8 of the Companies Act 2013. Next slide. Foreign source is defined. Now, what is foreign source? Because this is the key part. What is foreign source? Because FCRA applies only if you have received any contribution in the nature of an article, that is in-kind contribution, or a sum of money in rupees or in a foreign currency, or a certain stock from a foreign source. So foreign source is defined under Section 21J of FCRA, and it has 10 subsections to it. So we are going to look at each of them carefully. Next slide, please. So it includes the government of any foreign country or territory or any agency of such government. Therefore, if you're receiving money from any consulate, such as the Consul General of the USA or Australia or any embassy, etc., even that is a foreign contribution. Although the money may come to you in India in Indian rupees, it would be a foreign contribution, and you need to have FCRA registration. Otherwise, it would be a violation of the law. Any international agency, but not being the United Nations or any of its specialized agencies, World Bank, IMF. That means these are the categories to which FCRA doesn't apply. But it's very unlikely that the United Nations or UNICEF or anyone will directly give you contribution as an organization. But if at all that happens, it will not be treated as foreign contribution. A foreign company is a foreign source. A corporation, not being a foreign company, incorporated in a foreign country or territory, a multinational corporation, these are all foreign sources. Next slide, please. This was a particular provision. It still remains over there, but it has been amended under the Finance Act of 2016 and 18, whereby even if it was a company registered under the Indian Companies Act, and if the shareholding was more than 50% by FDIs or FIIs, even that was considered as a foreign source. So until this amendment happened under the Finance Act 2016, even companies registered in India under the Indian Companies Act with a full Indian board, example, Axis Bank, HDFC Limited, etc., these were all considered as foreign sources till literally the year 2015. And therefore, even if you were receiving money at that point of time from HDFC Limited or any of those companies where more than 50% shareholding was by foreign FDIs or FIIs, these were considered as foreign source. But now, fortunately, this has been amended under Finance Act 2016 and 18, and therefore, these sort of companies are not considered as foreign source. Next slide, please. A trade union in any foreign country or territory is a foreign source. A foreign trust or a foreign foundation, this includes your Gates Foundation, Ford Foundation, Rockefeller, etc., or society, club, or association or individuals formed or registered outside India. And most important, a citizen of a foreign country. So the test under FCRA is citizenship. If the person giving you money is a citizen of a foreign country, regardless of whether it is given in India, in Indian rupees, that amount would be considered as a foreign contribution. And this is a key point that you need to understand, because oftentimes we do not understand the difference between what is an NRI, what is a PIO, what is a foreign citizen. So let me give you one example. That, let us say, a large number of our Indians are on work permits in the United Arab Emirates, UAE as we call it. None of them are citizens of the UAE. They are all on a work permit. They are all Indians holding an Indian passport. Now, even if you were receiving contribution in dirhams from the UAE, from a bank in the UAE, as long as the person giving you this contribution, the individual, states that I'm an Indian holding Indian passport only on a work permit and sending you, let us say, 1,000 dirhams by way of a contribution, that is not foreign contribution. You can actually receive it as a local contribution. Now let's fast forward to another situation where somebody is not an NRI, but what is called an OCI, an overseas citizen of India. Overseas citizen of India is the closest you can come to a dual citizenship. India doesn't offer dual citizenship, but it's the closest you come to it, where somebody is actually a citizen of the USA or the UK or Australia, New Zealand, whichever country, but also holds a PIO card or an OCI card as it is now called. An OCI has most rights that an Indian has, except the right to vote or to hold agricultural land or to be in government service, etc. But an OCI happens to be a citizen of a foreign country. And therefore, even if an OCI is giving you money to you in India, in Indian rupees, and it's regardless of whether it is given from his or her NRE account or NRO account, that contribution is considered as a foreign contribution. So it's a very tricky kind of a situation. The test for foreign contribution is citizen of a foreign country. So one of the fundamentals that you need to do in terms of due diligence of your donors, as you know, in today's time, you have to do a lot of due diligence. There was a time when donors did due diligence of NGOs, but We are in a world where now even we as recipient organizations need to do due diligence on our donors. You need to get complete name of the donor, address, PAN for purpose of income tax, and more importantly, obtain the citizenship of the individual donor. It's very important and very key, because if that person is an OCI, then it's a foreign contribution, regardless whether he gives it in India, in Indian rupees from his NRE account or NRO account. Next slide, please. So this is the amendment that I spoke about, where of 2016, where such company shall not be treated as a foreign source. I gave you this example of companies, financial institutions like HDFC, Axis Bank, which at that point of time had more than 50% shareholding when were treated as foreign source. But now with this particular amendment of 2016, they are not deemed as foreign source. So this is just by way of information. Next slide, please. This is the 2018 amendment, which took it back all the way to even the 1976 Act. So this is just for your academic information. Next slide, please. Okay. So where institutions are concerned, the following are foreign sources, which you need to, so without making things complicated for you, a company incorporated or registered outside of India giving you a contribution would certainly be considered as a foreign source, and therefore you need to have FCRA registration to receive contribution. Branch of a company incorporated or registered outside India. Now, many a times you find that branch companies incorporated or registered outside of India also have branches in India, but not registered under the Indian Companies Act. They may be running as liaison offices or branch offices under RBI clearance. Such sort of branches are also considered as foreign source. Subsidiary of a foreign company registered outside India. But of course, if the subsidiary of the company registered outside India is registered in India under the Indian Companies Act, that would be considered as local. An MNC controlled from outside India, but again, it may be controlled, but if it is the MNC, like for example, Coca-Cola India, Pepsi India, etc., these are all registered under the Indian Companies Act, and therefore Ministry of Home Affairs has clarified that if they are registered under the Indian Companies Act of 2013 or the old Act of 1956, they would be considered as local source and not foreign. An Indian company with more than 50% shareholding, but where the shareholding exceed FDI. Now, it's very unlikely that any company would be able to exceed FDI norms under FEMA. So this is for your understanding in terms of these would be considered as foreign source. So in essence, if it happens to be a branch office or a liaison office not registered under the Indian Companies Act, then it would be a foreign source. So again, once again, as you do the due diligence with regard to your individual donors, do so with your corporate donors as well. Please check the status of the company, whether it is a company registered under the Indian Companies Act, and also get a disclaimer from them that they do not happen to be a foreign source as understood under FCRA. Next slide, please. So this is like a quick check. Funds received from a non-resident Indian, obviously that would be a local. Funds received from an overseas citizen of India, even if received in Indian rupees, it would actually be a foreign contribution. Funds received from a citizen of a foreign country, obviously would be a foreign contribution. Donations, grants from companies where more than 50% of the shareholding is by foreigners, well, because of the amendment of 2016, it would be local and not foreign. And donations, grants from foreign companies, subsidiaries of foreign companies and multinational companies, if they are registered under the Indian Companies Act, would be treated as local and not as foreign source. Next slide, please. So foreign source does not include, as per explanation 3 to 21H, that any commercial receipts that you receive, that means supposing you provide a service to a foreign source and you are actually charging a fee for that service, it is not a foreign contribution. So commercial receipts are taken outside the purview of FCRA. And or supposing there are goods that are made by your NGO, and if you are selling those goods to a foreign source, that also is not to be, as long as this is done on an invoice basis. Very clearly, explanation 3 to 21H of FCRA says, and this is what it says: any amount received by any person includes your NGO or even individual, from a foreign source by way of a fee, including fee charged for an educational institution in India from foreign students, or towards cost in lieu of goods or services rendered by such person in the ordinary course of business, trade, or commerce, whether within India or outside India, or any contribution received from an agent of a foreign source towards such fee or cost shall be excluded from the definition of foreign contribution within the meaning of this clause. So it's very explanation under explanations 3 to section 21H of FCRA 2010 that commercial receipts are not considered as foreign contribution. Next slide, please. So move on to the next slide, please. So this is classically to show you a difference between what is prior permission and registration. Prior permission is a one-off foreign donation that you're going to be receiving. You may apply for that. But if you are interested in multiple contributions that you want to have a registration for a period of 5 years, then registration is your way. Prior permission, the online application is in form number FC3B, B for Bombay. And registration is an online form called FC3A. When do you do that? You go for prior permission if it's only a one specific donor for a specific sum of money, as I have explained to you a little while ago. Whereas if you have multiple kind of donors, then you need to go for FCRA. Also, FCRA is granted to an organization only if you have completed at least 3 years in existence and you have spent at least 15 lakhs in aggregate over the last 3 years on your actual programs, activities. So if that has not been the case, then you can again go for prior permission if you happen to be less than 3 years old. For prior permission, you need to show the donor's letter of intent and what activities you are going to undertake and what you have already been undertaking. And for registration, you need to have an activity report of 3 years and audited accounts of 3 years. The fee, online fee for prior permission is 5,000, which is to be paid to the Ministry of Home Affairs. And for registration, the online fee is 10,000. This can be done by use of a credit card or a debit card. Next slide, please. So every organization that applies for prior permission, registration, or even renewal, the chief functionary of that organization, which could be your managing trustee or it could be your CEO, and everyone who's on your governing board needs to provide an affidavit, which has to be on a 10 rupees stamp paper and has to make certain declarations that you are not in violation of section 12.4. Section 12.4 of the FCRA is a very elaborate section which talks of various violations. And you are making a submission here on a sworn affidavit duly kind of attested by a notary that the person, none of your board members, your governing board members, or the chief functionary or the CEO has been in violation of section 12.4 of FCRA. Next slide, please. So this is section 12.4 of FCRA. What should not be violated? The person making an application for registration or grant of prior permission is not a fictitious or benami, and that is why they insist on proof of identity, such as you have to provide your Aadhaar details and the PAN details. Has not been prosecuted or convicted for indulging in activities aimed at conversion through inducement or force, either directly or indirectly, from one religious faith to another. Has not been prosecuted or convicted for creating communal tension or disharmony in any specified district or any other part of the country, has not been found guilty for diversion or misutilization of its fund, is not engaged or likely to engage in propagation of sedition or advocate violent methods. These are the things you are saying in your sworn affidavit, that I have not violated any of these provisions, nor will I be violating them. Next slide, please. It continues 12.4. You further say that the acceptance of foreign contribution by the association or person is not likely to affect prejudicially the sovereignty and integrity of India, the security, strategic, scientific, and economic interests of the state, public interest, freedom or fairness of elections or any legislature, friendly relationship with any foreign state, harmony between religious, racial, social, linguistic, regional groups, caste, communities. Next slide, please. The acceptance of foreign contribution shall not lead to incitement of any offense, shall not endanger the life or physical safety of any person. These are the various affirmations that you're making. Now, in case your application for registration, prior permission, or even for renewal is rejected by the Ministry of Home Affairs, what is the appellate remedy? As you know that even under income tax, if your tax exemption is not granted, you go to the appellate tribunal, etc. In like manner, you have the option here to file a review petition under Section 32(1) of FCRA. Until recently, you could have sent a hard copy. Now they have tried to make it an online process. And such petition should be accompanied by evidence that application of the renewal was filed in time. Because very often, there have been errors of the system rather than the actual case. So you have to provide justification why you feel that you have been wrongly denied registration or prior permission or your renewal. Next slide. Now, if your application of the review petition also fails, within 60 days of that, you can directly approach the High Court. So the appellate remedy for any kind of rejection is go for a review petition, and if that gets worked out for you, and we have seen that in recent history, quite a few recent review petitions have met with some success, where probably these were system errors rather than actual errors, and some of them who were denied renewal got their renewal restored, etc. So there have been happy cases also in recent history with regard to that. And of course, if you are agreed with even the review petition not being granted in your favor, you can always move the High Court of Judicature, and within 60 days of the order of rejection of your review petition. Next slide, please. So these are some key online forms. FC1 is not of so much importance to you because it's intimation of receipt of foreign contribution by way of a gift from a relative or an individual, application for seeking prior permission for hospitality, etc. What is important for you is Form FC3A, which is the form for brand new registration if you're going, FC3B, application for prior permission, FC3C for application of renewal of registration, and most important, FC4, which is your annual return that you file and which must be done by 31st of March. Next slide, please. There is also for various changes that may happen from time to time, such as if there is a change in the name of your organization or address within the state, there's an online form called FC6A. If there is a change in your aims and objects, if you have been through that process, then you have to file an online form called FC6B. When you have changed your utilization account, it is FC6C. For any kind of multiple utilization accounts that you may want to have, you are allowed to have utilization accounts, but must be linked to your main designated FCRA account. The form is FC6D. And if there is any change in your key board members, once upon a time, only if more than 50% of your governing board change, you had to file this form. Now, even if a single board member either resigns or dies or a new member is appointed, Form FC6E needs to be filed. Next slide, please. Most of you may be aware that before you apply for registration or for prior permission, you also need to generate a unique identification number by going to the Niti Aayog's website and to the NGO Darpan portal and fill in details about your organization. It's a fairly simple process, and a 16-digit unique identification number will be generated, and that needs to be quoted on your FCRA application. Next slide, please. So this is how you apply for your Niti Aayog UDI, and this is the link to that. Next slide, please. Some of the requirements is that you need to maintain a separate designated FCRA account exclusively only with the State Bank of India New Delhi main branch to receive foreign contribution. This is as per the amendment that happened in September 2020, that all foreign contributions must come to only one, what is referred to as a gateway account or referred to as your designated FCRA account, that all foreign contributions must come only into this bank account with State Bank of India, New Delhi main branch. No local amount goes over there. Only foreign contributions received for the first time in India need to come there. After that, you can have FCRA utilization accounts by due process, of course, and approval of the Ministry of Home Affairs, where you can receive it in the designated account and then move it to your utilization account. That is allowed. But let us say you have got the designated FCRA account with State Bank, but you also have a utilization account with approval with, let's say, HDFC or Central Bank of India. Foreign contributions cannot come to your utilization account. It must first go to only your designated account with State Bank of India, New Delhi main branch. So that is very, very clear. Any violation of that could lead to penalties. Next slide, please. NGOs may maintain multiple utilization accounts, provided only one designated bank account with State Bank of India, New Delhi main branch is maintained for receiving all foreign contributions. Next slide, please. So you can have these multiple project utilization accounts, but you have to first fill up these details, apply in form number FC6D, wait for the approval of the Ministry of Home Affairs, and then you can make that operational. That means you'll receive all money in the gateway account with State Bank of India. And after that, you move the funds to your utilization bank. And the utilization account can be with any scheduled bank. It could be one of the nationalized banks, or you can even have a private bank for that, for utilization account. Next slide, please. You need to keep separate books of accounts. If you don't keep the old-fashioned books of accounts, then in your tally, you should ensure that foreign contributions are separately accounted for. There's a separate FCRA-based ledger, FCRA-based cash book, etc. So make sure that separate books of accounts are maintained with regard to FCRA. It's a compliance requirement. Next slide, please. In-kind donations, you need to keep a register of that. You can keep it again as an Excel sheet in your system if you like, but all in-kind donations received from foreign source must also be recorded in a register. Next slide, please. No foreigner as a trustee. So Ministry of Home Affairs seems to have a problem with that. They seem to tolerate OCIs. That means you can have an OCI on your governing board, but an absolute foreign national is not supposed to be on your governing board. Only certain categories of people who have been married to Indians or have provided service in India, the Ministry of Home Affairs may grant permission for having them on your governing board. Next slide, please. So this is the condition for a foreigner to be on your board. Foreigner is married to an Indian citizen. Foreigner has been living and working in India for at least 5 years, etc. So there is long and short, I mean, try to avoid foreigners on your board. OCIs will be tolerated, but again, details will have to be provided. When did that person become an OCI? What is the address in the foreign country? When did the person require or obtain citizenship of that country, etc. So that's how it is. Next slide, please. Admin expenses cannot exceed more than 20% of the foreign contributions you receive in any given year. So let us say that this is nothing to do with your total receipts in the year, only where FCRA is concerned. Let us say in aggregate, in financial year 2022-23, you receive like 1 crore of rupees from foreign sources. You cannot spend more than 20 lakhs, that is at the rate of 20% on admin costs. What is admin cost has been defined in the Rule 5 of FCRA. We'll come to that later when we look at the amendments that happened in 2020. But this is something else as part of the compliance that you need to keep in mind. Next slide, please. You cannot transfer funds to another NGO. Until September 2020, if you had FCRA registration, you could sub-grant that money to another NGO, which also had FCRA, and it needed to go into that FCRA account. But come September 29, 2020, sub-granting has been made a violation of the law. That means if you have registration or prior permission under FCRA, you need to use the foreign contributions on your own. You cannot sub-grant it to another organization. Whether it has FCRA or does not have FCRA is immaterial. You have to utilize the foreign contributions on your own. So no transfer of funds to any other organization. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, you need to file your return every year in a form called FC4. It's an online form again, and the date is 31st of December. Generally, income tax gives you 6 months from the close of financial year to file your ITR 7 and audit report in 10B, etc. But Home Ministry actually provides you 9 months after close of the financial year. That means, let us say, for your previous year, 21-22, you have until 31st of December this year to file your return in FC4 with the Ministry of Home Affairs. Again, it's an online form. Next slide, please. So these are some of the submissions that you make in Form FC4. If the foreign contribution relates to any articles, intimation should also be given in another form called FC1. Don't want to get into too much of a detail on all this. Next slide, please. In any year that you think that you have not received foreign contribution, don't think that, okay, I didn't receive any foreign contribution, there is no need for me to file FC4. You have to file even a nil return. So even let us say in 2 consecutive years, you received no foreign contribution. Yes, but yet if you want to keep your FCRA status alive, you need to file the return by 31st of December as a nil return. That is, you just show 00 as foreign contributions received during the fiscal year. Next slide, please. Okay, any interest or any other income that is generated out of your FCRA assets have to be accounted for under FCRA. So even if you have, let us say, put some of your excess foreign contributions in some kind of a permissible investment, any interest dividend that is earned on that must actually come only into your FCRA account again, and you have to account it for it. Although it is interest that you have earned in India in Indian rupees, it must be treated as a foreign contribution. That is how the law is. Next slide, please. So FCRA permitted investments, FDs are allowed. It's perhaps one of the best ways you can go. Preferably, you may want to have FDs with the State Bank of India in New Delhi main branch. You can't go wrong with that, so that it will ensure that any interest will go only into that account. No speculative investments are allowed, and you are not allowed to put any of your foreign contributions in mutual funds. This is a strict no-no as per Ministry of Home Affairs. Next slide, please. So these are some compounding of offenses. It gives you in terms of what does the penalty involve. So if you accept foreign contribution without registration or prior permission, the penalty is 1 lakh rupees or 30% of the foreign contribution received, whichever is higher. So it's a very severe penalty. So make sure that you don't receive foreign contribution unless you have registration or prior permission. Next slide, please. If you transfer your foreign contributions to another organization knowingly, unknowingly, the penalty is 1 lakh rupees or 10% of the amount transferred, whichever is higher, provided that the transfer of foreign contribution inclusive of more than one instance of transfer shall be compoundable only. That means if you keep on doing this, you cannot be condoned. You will probably end up losing your FCRA. Next slide, please. Defraying admin expenditure over the prescribed limit. That is, if you have spent more than 20% of foreign contribution, the penalty for that is 1 lakh rupees or 5% of such foreign contribution defrayed beyond the permissible limit, whichever is higher. Next slide, please. Not receiving foreign contribution in your designated FCRA account. By mistake, some donor put it into your local account or put it into your utilization account. Please beware that the penalty is 1 lakh rupees or 5% of the contribution received in such non-designated account, whichever is higher. So there is a severe penalty for all these mistakes that can happen. Next slide, please. Receiving local funds in an FCRA account, that also is an offense. The penalty is 1 lakh rupees or 2% of such deposit, whichever is higher. Next slide, please. Not maintaining separate FCRA account and records, that is in your tally system, 1 lakh rupees or 5% of the foreign contribution during the relevant period of non-maintenance of account, whichever is higher. Next slide, please. Failure to intimate the opening of FCRA utilization accounts. You think that I've got the State Bank of India account, now I will open a utilization account, but will not seek the ministry's permission for that. Penalty is 10,000 rupees per utilization account for failure to intimate within the prescribed time. The prescribed limit is now 45 days for any of these changes. Next slide, please. Penalty for failure to intimate any other changes, like your board member has changed and you have not intimated that within 45 days, 10,000 rupees per utilization account for failure to intimate within the prescribed time. Next. Failure to put FCRA accounts on your own website. You are required to put your income and expenditure and your balance sheet pertaining only to FCRA on your own website. If you fail to do that, the penalty is 10,000 rupees for each violation for every year. Next slide, please. Application for compounding offenses of FCRA. You have to go under it. There is a process that has been laid down now. It has been made into an online process. Next slide, please. So I'm very quickly going to take you through what has really changed since 29th of September 2020. It was a COVID year. First was an amendment that was made to Section 7 that no subgranting will be allowed. If that is there, that becomes a violation. Next slide, please. The second was this cap on administrative expenses, not more than 20%. Let's look at the next slide to give you a sense of what is admin expense. So admin expenditure has been defined under Rule 5 of FCA, Foreign Contribution Regulation Rules of 2011. Admin expense includes the following: salaries, wages that you pay to your executive committee members, all expenses towards hiring of personnel for management of activities, all expenses related to consumables like electricity, telephone, etc., cost of accounting, expenses towards running and maintenance of vehicles, cost of writing and filing reports, legal and professional charges, rent of premises. All this is admin costs. It's been very clearly laid down under Rule 5. You can look it up on your own also on the ministry's website. Next slide. The only exception that is made is that there are two provisions given, that all expenses towards hiring of personnel for management of activities of the person and salaries, wages of any kind, remuneration paid. There are two provisions over here, that the expenditure incurred on salaries or remuneration of personnel engaged in training or for collection or analysis of field data of an association primarily engaged in research or training shall not be counted as an admin cost. And further, that expenses incurred directly in furtherance of the stated objectives of the welfare-oriented organization shall not be excluded from the administrative expense. So anyone who's actually implementing your program is considered as a program expenditure, and they have given examples that, and it's an indicative list, such as salaries to doctors of a hospital, salaries to teachers of a school. So anyone who's actually running your program on the field, on ground level, that salary should not be counted as admin costs. It may be counted as a program or a project cost. Next slide, please. So earlier, FCRA could be frozen by the Ministry of Home Affairs for by holding details, but now based on only a summary inquiry, your FCRA registration can be kind of put on a freeze. So these are certain empowerments that the Ministry of Home Affairs has bestowed on itself. Next slide, please. Aadhaar of all board members has to be disclosed. So when you are applying on the online form, every board member's PAN and Aadhaar will have to be disclosed. Next one. Organizations earlier were to be suspended for 180 days, but now they can be suspended for a period of 360 days. That means pending inquiry by the Ministry of Home Affairs for 360 days, your bank account, your FCRA bank account can be frozen by the ministry, and you can neither receive foreign contribution nor any money lying in your bank account can be utilized. This pertains only to your foreign contribution FCRA account, not to all your accounts. The new rules now allow you to voluntarily surrender your FCRA also, but very clearly amendment to section 14A says, even if you voluntarily surrender your FCRA, any assets created out of your FCRA, such as any bank balance remaining, or maybe there's a FCRA corpus, or maybe you purchase land or building or vehicles or equipment out of FCRA, all these will vest in a competent government authority, which happens to be the Ministry of Home Affairs. So even on voluntary surrender, you may be a 100% compliant organization, filing your returns on time, no violation of the law, but you decide at some point of time, I want to give it up my FCRA. Well, if you have no assets, not an issue, go right ahead and do that. But if there are any assets created with fair foreign contribution, these will too have to be surrendered to the government of India. Next slide, please. If your FCRA obviously has been cancelled by the Ministry of Home Affairs due to any violation, once again, your assets, your FCRA assets will vest in the competent government authority, which is the Ministry of Home Affairs. Next slide, please. As we all know that renewal of FCRA is also taking a long time. We know by statistics that September last year in 2021, FCRA registration of close to about 15,000 organizations lapsed. And Ministry of Home Affairs undertook this Herculean exercise to treat each renewal as a brand new application. So visit the office and see whether the office exists, go to the project office, do a complete scan on all the board members, etc. Last heard is that till August last month, out of the 15,000 applications for renewal, just about 5,000 have been renewed, which means only 1/3 have managed renewal, 2/3 are still awaiting processing. And of course, Ministry of Home Affairs keeps extending by three months, but donors do not wish to give until they have complete clarity that you're not rejected, because I mean, extension means nothing. Extension means you can receive some foreign contribution or use your existing funds in your FCRA account, but no donor wishes to give you a large sum of money until they are sure that for the next 5 years you are renewed. So it's a big challenge that NGOs are facing as of now. Next slide, please. So FCRA account with SBI only. This is what was changed under section 17, that your designated bank account, FCRA, should be only with State Bank of India. If you had an earlier FCRA account, designated account with any bank, that can be treated as what is called additional FCRA bank account, and you have to file a form called FC6C. Next slide, please. So these are the amendments that happened to the rules, nothing much. Can we have a quick look at that? So organizations of a political nature can't receive foreign contributions. So what is political nature has been explained. If the organization participates in active politics or party politics, as the case may be, it will be deemed as an organization of a political nature. Next one. Eligibility criteria. Earlier on also, the organization for receiving FCRA needed to be 3 years old and should have spent at least 10 lakhs of rupees. Now the amount has been enhanced to 15 lakhs of rupees in aggregate to be spent over a period of 3 years to be eligible for registration. Next slide, please. So this is the eligibility for prior permission. If it is over 1 crore of rupees, there are certain compliances, not going into the detail for that. Next slide, because I want to leave some room for interaction. Eligibility. So not going through the details of this. Next slide. For renewal also, you have this form called FC3, and the fees for grant of prior permission is 5,000, for renewal is 5,000, and new registration is 10,000. Next. So these are the changes in the new online form. FC7 is a new form that has come for voluntary surrender of FCRA. In the online form of registration of prior permission or renewal, you also need to state whether you are a Hindu organization, Sikh, Muslim, Christian, Buddhist. This was not there in the earlier forms. PAN and Aadhaar has to be given. Also, the relationship of the board member. An unwritten code is that if more than 50% of your board members are related to each other, there might be complications. It must be disclosed whether any of the current office bearers or directors have been prosecuted for any offense, etc. So need to do a complete scan of your governing board members as well. Next slide. So these are the declarations that you make in your annual return. It's a very long list of, so I'm not going to read out everything. Next one. If there is any change in your key board members, earlier on it was if more than 50% of your board change. Now, even if one board member changes, that is resigns, dies, or you appoint a new one, you have to immediately file Form FC6E within 45 days of the change. Next slide, please. So the key compliance post 2020 amendments are that you need to have the Darpan ID, NGO Darpan ID with Niti Aayog. You need to open a designated FCRA account with SBI New Delhi main branch. File Form FC6. Now it is within 45 days with their most recent amendment. Earlier it was 15 days. Existing FCRA bank account may be retained as another or additional FCRA account, and other details of all key members and chief functionary needs to be disclosed. Next slide. FC4 for, this is dated, you can ignore it. Next slide. Okay, so these are the contact details of the Ministry of Home Affairs. And if you face any technical problems, etc., they have a helpline which is called supportfcra.go, and that's the phone number of the Ministry of Home Affairs. In case that's a helpline number actually. And I guess we have come to the end of the presentation. So it's now time for questions. You may close the PPT and we can enjoy 30 minutes of interaction. So it's perfectly as I expected that I would present everything for like an hour. I'm sorry we lost some time in the beginning with regard to technical glitches, but we still have a clear 30 minutes for interaction. So please go ahead. I would request Archita or someone to anchor questions if there are any in the chat box, etc.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Noshir, for the presentation has been highly informative and insightful. I'm sure there has been a lot of takeaways for all the participants. We have received a couple of questions, and let's start with the first one. So the question states that suppose we have received in-kind support in form of free vaccine from a foreign company that has a registered branch in India. The vaccine is sent from the company's India stock. Is this vaccine now considered as foreign contribution?
If the company is registered under the Indian Companies Act of 1956 or 2013, it is considered as a local contribution in kind. So please ask the company if they are registered under the Indian Companies Act and have what is called a SIN. SIN stands for CIN, Company Identification Number. If they can produce a SIN, it is considered as a local contribution in kind and not a foreign contribution.
All right, thank you. The next question states that if a OCI holder who lives and works in India makes a donation to a charity from the income earned in India, is that considered a foreign donation?
I have already covered it in the PPT, but I will once again reiterate the point. An OCI happens to be a citizen of a foreign country, and therefore under the definition given under FCRA is a foreign source. Whether he gives it in India, from an Indian bank, in Indian rupees, whether from his NRE account or NRO account, it is deemed as a foreign contribution. And must be, you need to have FCRA registration to accept that. This is made abundantly clear even on FCRA online in the Ministry of Home Affairs own FAQ. So you can look it up for your own conviction in this regard.
All right, thank you. The next question asks, NGO becomes eligible for FCRA registration after 3 years of inception. However, if the NGO is in the process of receiving any grant from foreign, in that case, can NGOs apply or request for prior permission?
Yes, that is what I've already stated in my PPT, that if you happen to be less than 3 years old, then you can apply for prior permission. And prior permission will be given to you only to receive one specific contribution from one specific source. So it doesn't mean that prior permission is something that you go for if you're less than 3 years old. So unless it's a very big donor, I mean, it's not worth it. Like somebody wants to send you like $500 and you want to go for prior permission for that, I think it's ridiculous. So I mean, if it's a reasonably good sum of money and you still have not completed 3 years, it is an option that you can perhaps exercise.
All right. The next question is, if we don't have an FCRA and any donor is transferring money through some other foreign donor who has an Indian account, So is it a foreign donation?
Well, where you are concerned, you are receiving money from the Indian donor. I mean, if that Indian donor is receiving it like a remittance from whosoever, whatever, I mean, that is immaterial. On your record, you have received money from an Indian citizen from his Indian bank account, and per se, that should be okay.
All right.
But
Moving
please
on.
understand that too much of this happening may be considered as money laundering. So, as a one-off, it's all right, but don't make a habit out of it.
All right. What are some
And
of the...
remember that the person receiving this money as a remittance from abroad, it adds to that individual's personal income, which will be liable to tax as well.
Okay, noted. I hope that clears the answer. What are some reasons due to which an organization's FCRA can be suspended indefinitely?
Well, if you happen to be an organization that is seen as antagonistic to the government, we have seen in recent history classical examples of Greenpeace where they went through trouble because, you know, they were commenting on government policy. They were seen as stopping India's development, whether it concerned on mining or economic stability. Amnesty International was in trouble because it raised certain issues which were of a political nature, such as the Kashmir issue, etc. So we have seen live examples of all these kinds of things happening. So largely, if you happen to be what Ministry of Home Affairs likes to call welfare-oriented organization, they really don't see you as a problem. But if you are trying to influence government policy in a negative way as the government may see it, or having political influence, etc., then you may be suspended and ultimately your registration also may be taken away. So be careful what you're doing. As a pure welfare organization, you should be all right. But if you are even doing research, and which is research on government policy, and then you're going to be critical of that, etc., it could be a problem.
Okay. One of our members, People for Animals, Raipur 2, has raised the hand. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question. Are you able to unmute? Let me just check once again.
If the person is unable to unmute, let the person just put the question in the chat box.
Yes.
I saw a couple of other questions pop up, so maybe in the interest of time, you may want to read them out.
Yes, just a second. So, what is the basic difference between an additional FC account and the utilization account?
I'll explain that. I've got your question. So, additional account is basically your old FCRA designated account. Remember, when you were already an organization registered under FCRA, you probably had a designated FCRA account with an HDFC bank or a central bank or a whichever bank. You wanted to retain that. So, what you did is that post September 2020, you first went in for a designated bank account with State Bank of India, New Delhi main branch, but you also wanted to retain your old FCRA account, which is referred to as an additional account. And for that, you filed a form called FC6C to approve your State Bank of India account, as also this account, your old FCRA account, as an additional. Now, despite this additional account, you also want to have multiple utilization accounts because, you know, you may be a pan-India organization and you want some account in various states where you are operating, etc. There is another form called FC6D which has to be filed, and those are called FCRA utilization. Even the additional account is essentially a kind of a utilization account, but additional account means your old FCRA account, which is now considered as an additional account, but it's your old FCRA designated account is now referred to as an additional account. And there is only one designated FCRA account, which is with State Bank of India. I hope I've been clear.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Noshir. One of the questions is that is receiving items through Amazon India from foreign donors considered a foreign donation?
Yes, it would be considered as because Amazon is merely the portal. If the source is foreign, it's a foreign contribution. Who is delivering is not the point. As I give you the classic example, if somebody from the UAE sends the money to you in dirhams, sends it to you from a bank in the UAE, it's still not a foreign contribution because it's come from an Indian citizen. But you have the case of an OCI who is a citizen of a foreign country, gives you in India, in Indian rupees, from a bank in India, from his NRE or NRO, it's a foreign contribution. So this is how weird the FCRA is.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Noshir. If we do not have a FCRA and any donor is transferring money,
You,
sorry,
you, you saw the penalty clause for that minimum 1 lakh or whatever it is. I mean, that 30% now of the foreign contribution received, whichever is higher.
yes, you have touched on that. Is it necessary to have every individual trustee's account in SBI Bank?
No, not at all necessary. Not at all necessary. This is a myth that is being perpetuated by some sources, but that is not. My own organization has FCRA, and none of my board members have accounts with State Bank of India. It was never even asked for. So that is a myth. Nowhere does the Act, rules, FAQs, nowhere is that mentioned at all.
Okay. The next question is rental
It may
expenses.
just have proved a little practical from the KYC point of view. That's all, because if you were already a State Bank of India customer, then KYC processes, but then banks put you through KYC. That's all. But the law doesn't require you to do that. So if that answers that question.
So it is not mandatory, but
Not
one
at
can.
all, not at all, not at all. No, not a single board member or the chief functionary needs to have a account with SBI. Not necessary at all. The law doesn't require it. It's a myth.
The next question is rental expenses that are directly related to the program activities, such as
I'm
hospitals.
afraid no. I mean, rental by itself is treated as an admin cost. Unfortunately, that's how the law has been put. So, if you are running, let's say, a community center and you're paying a rental for that, it's an admin cost. The only exception that they have made is with regard to salaries and remuneration to program staff. Where rentals are concerned, repairs, renovation, all that is considered as admin cost and is capped now at 20% of the foreign contributions received during the year.
Okay. Yes. So PFA Raipur has shared that we are a People for Animals Raipur Chhattisgarh organization, which is not related to Menka Gandhiji's PFA. Her PFA has FCRA registration. So will we be able to get the FCRA registration as the name of the organization appears similar?
It's quite possible that you will get it. I don't see that as a problem because there are several organizations in this country that have a common name. And unlike companies where you go through a name clearance processes, the registrar of societies, etc., doesn't put you through name clearance. So I know of at least 3 or 4 Pragati foundations in this country. I know of similar. I think you just need to be, I mean, you obviously have a very different governing board, etc. I don't think that you would be punished for having a common name.
Okay.
But having said that, you can never know the mind of the Ministry of Home Affairs.
Okay. Yes. My accountant says that we have to pay a bribe of 1 lakh for FCR registration, and he has been pushing the registration for many years, saying the same.
Sack your accountant. FCRA has become a faceless process. In fact, a few months ago, you must have read that various corruptions, etc., were the talk in the media, etc. Several heads began to roll, etc. No, you need not pay a rupee except for the registration fees that are officially to be paid. I mean, the entire process has been made online. No agent is allowed inside the Ministry of Home Affairs FCRA wing. So I'm afraid your accountant is feeding you with wrong information. Either tell him to improve upon his knowledge in this regard or sack him.
Thank you, Mr. Noshir. Okay. Is there any withdrawal limit, utilization limit, or minimum balance maintenance limit for
Where,
FCRA
where
dedicated?
balance is concerned, the banks would have their minimum balance requirement. It may be 2,000 rupees, 500 rupees, 5,000. So you need to check with your bank as to what is the minimum balance required. But there is no cap on withdrawal per se. Certainly not under FCRA Act or the rules.
Okay.
But
Um,
banks may have certain limitations, so you need to check with your bank. But I
okay.
don't think there would be on withdrawals, there wouldn't be, except as you know, cash withdrawals now, there are, I mean, and under FCRA, they say you can't withdraw more than 2,000 rupees by way of cash from FCRA. So that is among the other things that you find on the ministry's website.
All right. If an employee take part in any political activities, campaigns that doesn't go very well with the ruling party or government, can that also be tracked down and put the organization's
Yes, it is possible. And if it is tracked down, your FCRA may be in jeopardy.
All right.
Avoid, request your employees to refrain from those kinds of activities or to seek another job, because it can unnecessarily jeopardize your FCRA registration.
All right. So the social media activities of all the employees are also taken into consideration in that case.
Any kind of political remarks, etc., on Facebook, LinkedIn, any of the Instagrams, etc. I mean, it is not that every organization is tracked, but today, as we know that, I mean, you never know who's tracking whom. So there is a potential risk. My job is to tell you that there is a potential risk. Please tell all your employees and all your important stakeholders to refrain from those kinds of activities, as it may affect your FCRA registration, prior permission, or renewal, as the case may be.
Thank you so much, Mr. Noshir. The next question is, what about fuel and vehicle maintenance costs that are used for program activities like
Earlier on, Ministry of Home Affairs had said that if it is like an ambulance or something, it would be a program expenditure. But now that particular FAQ has been taken away, and basically whatever you spend on petrol, maintenance of even an ambulance is seen as an admin cost, unfortunately, under the new FAQ and the new regime. So unfortunate. But I know that earlier on, cost towards vehicles, the entire thing has been removed now, and therefore the inference is, if that thing has been removed, it means that it's no longer valid. So yes, if you are running an ambulance, petrol, maintenance, repairs of that ambulance is not a program cost, it's an admin cost.
Noted. Following up on the previous question on the social media activity, if the profiles of employees are personal and are not shown to be related to the organization in any manner, can sharing political opinions still be a problem?
By a long shot, yes. We live in difficult times. I know this is a online program. The program is being recorded, so I do not wish to make any political statements. I would say try and avoid this as far as possible, especially if your organization is keen on getting FCRA or retaining its FCRA. You need to request all your staff, board members to exercise restraint where their personal political opinions are also concerned. It can by a long shot affect you. We live in very challenging times, as mildly as I can put it.
Okay. Can we buy assets like ambulance using donations in FCRA account?
Yes, you can. I mean, because it is for medical purposes. So you can, if you have received funds in your FCRA account as a general purpose, and you decide that you want to use this money to buy an ambulance for medical facilities, yes, you can use foreign contributions to buy medical equipment. I mean, during COVID times, people were even buying oxygen concentrators, etc., and a lot of these things, and using it. There's no particular bar on that.
Okay. The interest or income from in-kind donations has to be declared as earnings from foreign funds?
Yes, that's right. So, I mean, the classic case is that you, out of FCRA funds, you bought a piece of land and then you leased it out to someone. that rental is your foreign contribution. You put up a building there, you created a hospital or a school, all the money that you earn from that has to be accounted for under FCRA. It's very complex.
Okay, I think we have
Now, I
covered.
hope you realize when I told you at the beginning when people had not joined that many may not want to have FCRA. I hope you realize why I said that.
Yes, now I do, because at first I wondered why did you say that, and I was hoping for people to opt for it a little more after
I
this.
told you that they might change their mind.
It's very complex in
It's
nature.
extremely complex in nature. It's one of the most complex laws that one can encounter. Even the best of professionals are at sea when it comes to this particular piece of legislation. There are very few who understand this law inside out.
True. Can we do a construction or improvements to the shelter or hospital using FCRA donations?
Yes, you can, because if it's only, I mean, you're not investing in that property in that sense. It's already there, and you want to spend on. But again, remember that will be counted as an admin cost. So you have to be aware of the 20% rule with regard to admin costs. So it will be counted as an admin cost of your FCRA fund. So be a little wary about that. But yes, foreign contributions can be used for renovations and repairs, but will be counted as an admin cost.
All right. So the contribution can be used, but it will be considered as an admin cost later.
Correct, and not a program cost.
Not a program cost. Okay. I think we have pretty much covered all the questions that we have received, and some of our members have also shared how useful this session has been. And
you can share that offline with me, any feedback, positive, negative, whether things were clear, not clear. You can share that offline with me. I mean,
in the Q&A section also, there has been pouring compliments for the session. And
I'm very pleased to know that despite a very complex and complicated law, people patiently heard me out for like an hour. Once again, I was a little unnerved with the technological glitches, but I mean, I was fortunately able to recover my wits and proceed with the program.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mr. Noshir. I have to say that you have provided us with so much information and knowledge that even I would like to revisit the webinar later and relook at it and note down the important points.
I still see some questions popping. So if there is anything important, would you like to check?
Yes, let me just check it again. Yes, we do have another question. So after suspension, can we put a request to release some amount from the foreign funds? As we have heard about 25%, but is it at their discretion to release the
Yes,
funds?
it is at the discretion of the Ministry of Home Affairs. They may grant you permission to partly use it for your routine administrative costs, etc. But until ministry gives a specific, more or less, they will, when they say you are under suspension, they give clear instructions to your bank to freeze the bank account. So in other words, you cannot receive money nor spend anything. So the moment you try to transfer some money to an employee by way of a salary, the bank will say your account is frozen. So until Ministry of Home Affairs gives you a little bit of relaxation in that regard, nothing will happen. Everything will stand frozen, and now up to a period of 360 days. Earlier on, it was 180 days.
Okay.
There are a couple of more.
These are mostly compliments of how the session has been and how
share them offline if you like. Just an overall feedback is also good enough. Yeah.
Also, one of our members asked if she can ask a question later also. So please feel free to share your questions on email. We can connect with Mr. Noshir, and Mr. Noshir can share his responses.
Yeah, go ahead.
We have again received one last question. Is it on the discretion of MHA that they will grant the access to FC accounts after being suspended for more than 180 days?
Yes. Yes. I mean, they may 180 days is not there. Now it is 360 days. I'm repeating probably for the third time. You can be suspended for 360 days. And after that, if they are unable to pass the order, they will still probably not give any instructions to the bank to unfreeze your account. So your only recourse is maybe go to the court for redress in this regard, etc., which will entail cost, time. So it just will be very bad news. And if you have been suspended because of some major violation of FCRA, it is probable that after suspension, they will just probably take away your FCRA and say you are now deregistered. And whatever are the assets remaining, which is monies in your FCRA bank account, etc., will all vest in the Ministry of Home Affairs. Nothing will come to you if you are deregistered. And I mentioned that in my PowerPoint.
All right.
Okay, we need to start winding up. It's nearly 6:30.
Yes. Let's do that. And yes, thank you so much, Mr. Noshir, for your valuable time, and I really appreciate all the information that you have shared with us. To all our members, thank you for participating in the webinar. And you can also revisit the webinar later on our FIAPO's YouTube channel, where you can check the information. And yes, that's it. Thank you, everyone, and have a good weekend. Thank you so much, Mr. Noshir.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.